Welcome to Automotive EV Live. During this session with Justin Benson, we unfortunately had a technical issue with the sound. Once this was rectified, we now rejoin Justin as he resumes his vehicle production and sales forecast.
So this was the bad news slide. Because of COVID, there was the general reduction in the UK on car sales. Diesel and petrol vehicles were down significantly, even more so. But that's led to this new surge in hybrids and alternative fuel vehicles. So that's the bad news piece, and I just then went on to concentrate a bit on the good news, which is when you look at battery electric vehicles in particular, there's a huge growth in that area. And then I was saying in my view, I think the inflection point has happened now. It's happened, it's happening. So if it hasn't happened, it's happening now. And you look at that market share point at the bottom of the slide, it's increased dramatically just in a year. I know it's a smaller market now in effect, but this is a bigger chunk of a smaller market. It's still grown significantly. Some of the highlights, hopefully you were able to read that. If not, you won't be able to hear me, but the big messages here is there's the models to choose for consumers. There's a huge range now. Some really interesting SUV vehicles coming out, and again, fully battery electric SUVs coming out, which are very popular. VW definitely leading the pack. As we know, they've bet heavily on battery. And I've said fail to comply, which is very harsh of me. They've missed it by a very small percentage, and it will probably mean a European fine, but they are definitely leading the pack on electric and developing that in the future. Mercedes and BMW have announced. So the BMW one is probably down to the fact that some of their products didn't get to market quick enough, like the ID3. They were 3 or 4 months later than planned, and that's just had a slight effect on that, unfortunately. But Mercedes and BMW have announced they're compliant, but they're much more in the plug-in hybrid area and the hybrid type products. And you could argue as to whether or not longer term that is a good strategy. It certainly was, I think, CO2 targets, but I think longer term the demand is going to be for purely battery electric vehicles, which I'm illustrating here now in Western Europe, for example. It's now over 1 million battery electric and plug-in models. That excludes other medium hybrids and other hybrids. This one very quickly was just looking at the balance between fully electric versus plug-in hybrids, and demonstrating the plug-in mix in the sense of how much of the individual country markets are moving towards electric, which is pretty high. Sort of 10% of any market is pretty big, and it's growing. And of course, all of them are vying for that marketplace. And just showing the over 1 million plugins now being sold in Western Europe. This is probably more helpful in the sense that this is where my inflection point argument comes from. Looking on the right hand side there, that's 2020. That last quarter of the graph is 2020 up to November, and you can see the significant upticks in Germany, France, and UK. Norway is balanced out now because it's very that's sort of they've had their growth, if you will. In many respects, they're quite saturated for battery electric vehicles in that market, and they're probably leveled out a bit. But the rest, are all moving in a very quite a steep direction. This very quickly, hopefully you got most of this, I think. So I won't dwell on this, other than I think the incentives is a big reason as to why those curves are starting to increase. Regulation is here to stay. None of the car manufacturers argued against keeping CO2 targets last year. You could have gone to the EU and UK governments and said, let's take away the targets because we want to keep sales up. But none of them did that. They kept pursuing the CO2 target, and which I think was great, and has demonstrated this move towards electric vehicles. Any more detail on that, please do perhaps contact me elsewhere. The two boxes on the right hand side, one is a sort of analyst view, and then the alternative view, I guess, is more my view, where I've been a bit more bullish about the growth. I just feel now with the inflection point and the curves I'm seeing, we could be looking at some much bigger numbers. This is interesting. I use Germany as a bit of a proxy for Europe, because obviously most of the manufacturing is in Europe, and you can see that black line there is demonstrating the capacity to make electric vehicles is increasing. The trend is very much up, as you'd expect, but driven by these big investments by particularly Volkswagen, but also the other main manufacturers. And it's important, obviously, because if the sales are going up, we need production capacity to go up at a similar rate. And although I think there is a bit of a supply issue, nevertheless, the investment is pouring in at the moment to improve the ability to meet the demand of the future. So again, the sort of the sales curve and the production curves are moving in a similar direction. I share this because this is interesting. It's changed quite a bit over the last year. There's been lots of ups and downs. In particular, Tesla, who came in early in 2019, as you're aware, grasped quite a big chunk of the market, and they've been leveling out recently as part of a wider group as all those models came to market. The interesting one I thought from this, because there's an element of leveling out here in the sense of jockeying for position, and you could argue with this. It'd be interesting to see what happens in Q1, Q2 this year. But they're all jockeying for position now, and there's an element of showing that the maturity of these main players in the development of their product, they're starting to mature. So what you have to bear in mind with this is that there is just general growth going on behind it. There'll be a bit of jockeying now for market positioning. But the one interesting thing here was Hyundai and Kia. As you can see, their curve at the moment is one of it's probably the only one that's really demonstrating a big uptick. And they've got some interesting products that have just come out and are getting rave reviews, and are in that sort of price bracket. And they're particularly sort of SUV type, which of course are very popular. And it could be interesting then to see how they fare against these other, these other bigger brands in Europe. These are the big European brands in Europe over the next couple of quarters. But hopefully that's it's interesting in the sense that so far as people's positioning, so the car manufacturers' positioning is concerned, there's some evidence to suggest there it's starting to balance out. And so we'll be interested to see where the competition goes going forward. Keep an eye on Hyundai, though, I think, is an interesting observation. Okay. So this is my final slide. It's just a couple of thoughts. All of that going on, growth is really important, but you're moving from a few tens of thousands making vehicles now to hundreds of thousands. You're moving to the volumes that we used to be making with diesels and petrol. So cost competitiveness is key, and because this was new technology, no one wanted to make a bad electric vehicle when they put it onto the market. So to a degree, money wasn't the object. It wasn't necessarily the objective to make a cost-effective vehicle. The idea was to make a quality vehicle that you could sell in the market and to start to drive into the marketplace. But now that the volumes are increasing, cost competitiveness is really important. So if you're looking at your supply chain, and I mean that across the piece, suppliers right through to dealers and the car manufacturers and dealers. So if you are looking at your BOM cost, for example, we're finding huge efficiencies and cost reduction in your bill of materials and the opportunity to reduce cost in that area. There are more efficient ways and obviously cost approaches that you could make towards your distribution, either locally or internationally. Having said that, there's some built-in costs there, isn't there, with COVID and Brexit. But from a product perspective, we are seeing some real opportunity to reduce cost in the actual equipment itself. The production, these guys have been doing it, producing passenger vehicles or commercial vehicles. They've been doing it for 100 years. So it is about the material cost, and what's coming into the factory on one end now is really important. And we're finding ways in which to maintain quality or improve it, but reduce the cost significantly. And that, of course, is going to help the consumer in the future and help sales of this and help the margins, to be frank, for the different parts of the supply chain as we go forward. And more on that, if by all means, do give me a call. We've got a lot more detail on that if needed. And then finally is a bit of a plea, really, because Vendigital, sort of the clue is in the title. We do a lot of data and getting insights from data. We do a lot of digital, have a lot of digital platforms to get the right insights. But what we're seeing a lot of now is joining systems up. So a lot of companies have got disparate ERP systems, disparate sales systems, disconnected systems, if you will. And what we're seeing is huge benefit from looking at your systems and joining them up in a way quickly and effectively to focus on where you're going to get insights, whether that's to reduce cost, improve efficiency, or increase sales. We're finding some great opportunities from the data if you start to join up your systems and really trying to get a holistic view of what's going on. Just a few thoughts there on perhaps business improvement, which hopefully is helpful. And I commend the data to you, and please do challenge or ask questions now. Peter, that's gone on a little bit longer, I think, than we expected because of the technical problem, but any questions coming through?
That's right. There was quite a bit of a flurry at the beginning because they couldn't hear, but eventually that's resolved. One quick point, sort of, are we going to see more tech company driven vehicles, and that traditional vehicle manufacturers have probably got their badge on, but are heavily influenced with technology platforms? Yeah,
I mean, that's a big question, because you start to look at what you're good at. So the rumors in the market are, you've got, for example, there's a rumor about Apple going into arrangements with car manufacturers to look at making the Apple car. It's not beyond the wit of man to realize that there will be conversations going on. The reason you've got people like Apple, Google, and those others are interested in this is because of data, consumer data. So they have these big tech companies have, arguably a monopoly on the data, our day-to-day data, through social media and so on. And what they don't want to lose that data through people moving from their homes to vehicles. And they're very interested in how people use vehicles, and particularly if you go to autonomy, how those vehicles are operated and what happens in those vehicles while you and I are traveling in them, whether it be with commercial vehicles, with goods, or with people, is really important to them, because that gives them more data, more ways to get to their customers. So you've had the data guys trying to look at the manufacturers and thinking about, well, how do I make a car? And then you've got the car manufacturers who've been thinking about, well, how do I get to the data? So you've got this kind of meeting now going on in the middle. And the car manufacturers make great product, and obviously the technology companies know how to make to make value out of data. So there's going to be some point where it kind of comes together, and how that looks. But at the end of the day, Peter, it's how you make money out of it. And the data companies know how to make money out of data, whereas car companies know how to make money out of making cars, which is, you sell a car, make a margin. And at the moment, that isn't changing much. And that, for me, is the big is the big question. How do you move from making a product to selling that product, but then all the services around it? And I think car companies are realizing that they've invested quite heavily in this area and trying to understand how that works. But when you compare it to Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon and so on, are you in a better position if you share that ability, that knowledge to do that? So I would see more collaborations, however they may be, acquisitions, joint ventures, what have you, but definitely more collaboration in this area. So I think that ultimately the data side of it will drive the kind of services that auto manufacturers will offer. Now, where that comes from, whether directly from an auto manufacturer or a third-party partner, is really up for grabs at the moment. So there is a huge opportunity for it to drive difference in services. Ergo, the consumer will buy more services when they are traveling around in their vehicles, or use more services when they're traveling around in their vehicles. Where those services come from is a big question at the moment, Peter. It's a good question.
Looking at obviously the increase in volumes which we're fortunately getting on battery electric, It's still small in relation to the overall scheme of things, but at least the positive side, it's growing. But we're also finding sort of countries, rightly so, bringing in sort of time frames in which to achieve, which 9 years, as far as we're concerned, losing all sort of petrol and diesel new is quite a challenging target. But with the uptake on more electric vehicles, will we see a change in the way people are buying? You know, it's an electric vehicle. Would you not have it from your energy provider? Will there be an OEM energy provider tie-up that gets stronger?
Yeah, I think that latter point is more likely. I think, if you're going back to my services point, so there's a big aspect to this, which is, in general terms, in automotive, called the aftermarket. Yeah. So once you've bought the car, what happens? So you need to service it, maintain it, new tires, all that kind of stuff. And with an internal combustion engine, there is a pretty clear, revenue stream on that afterwards. With electric vehicles, it's less clear. There is still a maintenance aspect to it, but is it once a year? Is it once every 3 years? How much do you do over the air? What are the sort of the different services that you bring? So you have to look at your electric vehicle, when you're a car manufacturer in particular, a bit differently. And you've given a perfect example there of your, you need electric power. Now, at the moment, you provide the product, and then you go to a BP or Shell or whoever to fill it with fuel. When you are setting up there's an opportunity here to when you're selling the vehicle, could you sell a package of electricity with it? And from your home, or when you use it externally, and so on, and what's the revenue stream there, and how do you, as a seller of the vehicle, become part of that revenue stream? And you need to therefore work with the electricity providers. But that is a really good example of that. But I don't see, for example, an E.ON or an EDF selling cars as such. I think it will be more about how you package up the product and services in a way that a consumer finds really valuable. And one of the areas is electricity. Another area might be maintenance, but that then becomes an issue on parts, but that becomes a longer term issue, because electric vehicles will arguably perhaps, but need less maintenance and service. But I also say, to particularly with your audience, is that don't despair too much on your existing customers, because particularly in the aftermarket, you've still got to move a lot of internal combustion engine parts around. There's going to be a market there for some time post 2030, because there's going to be, you're looking at a car park in the UK of about 40 million vehicles, 38 to 40 million vehicles, most of which, by far of which, are internal combustion engine vehicles. We still need maintaining, still need servicing, will still be available on the road, and we'll need parts distributed around the country, and we'll still need things going on. But it's then, how do you work with your customers at the moment to help them and develop the services and the other things that's going to be needed for a battery electric vehicle?
Thanks. Apart from the cost element, obviously, probably is dissuading an element of people to move electric, but as we're seeing across Germany, the incentives have made a colossal difference in terms of their vehicle sales.
Yeah.
Should we be not only looking at that, but also addressing more the ability to be able to go from A to B how we're used to? We've got this, or had this, major range anxiety with owning an EV. Yet the bulk of us don't cover anything like that range on a normal day anyway.
Yeah.
But is it range that's the biggest challenge, or is it recharge that we need to address better?
Again, brilliant. Yeah, that's a brilliant question. So it depends on the consumer, is what I'm finding, because at the moment the consumer wants a high range because they're worried about running out of juice when they're out and about. There is, anecdotally, if you take Tesla, for example, when everyone bought the Model S, they always bought it with a bigger battery pack. But when they went and bought a second Tesla S, they always bought the smaller battery pack. And as the battery pack is a huge cost of the vehicle and a huge part of the pricing of the vehicle, it meant they could go to a much cheaper vehicle because they were prepared to take a lesser range, because they realised that their behaviour when they were driving the vehicle was very different to their perceived need of a longer range. So there's an element as people get to use the vehicles more often and realise their behaviours when they're driving them around. That's really helpful. So I know there's a lot of people, I'm sure you do, that have second-hand electric vehicles on their drives, and they use them for all the local, school run, going to the shops, etc., etc. And then if they've got to go up to see Scotland to see Granny or go on a big business trip, they'll go in the plug-in hybrid or the petrol engine car on the drivers instead. So a lot of it is about behaviour. But you make a good point because of the infrastructure implications. And so one of the schools of thought is that if you have a strong infrastructure set up and you can charge regularly and quickly, a bit like we can do now with charging up our petrol tanks, then you therefore by definition would be quite happy with a smaller battery pack. So you could reduce the cost of the car quite significantly and ergo the price of the vehicle. So it's a little bit how the consumer, and at the moment I'm sort of seeing it if I talk to my auto retail clients, they say range is really important, and it's absolutely fundamental to when they're selling the battery electric vehicle. But when I'm talking to everyone in the industry and the supply chain, it's about getting the size of the battery pack right with the charging infrastructure, which will help get the price right and also help with consumers being much more comfortable driving them around over long distances. But I do say 85% of all journeys are less than 15 miles. So, if you're thinking about buying a battery electric vehicle and you're worried about range, we tend to have more than one car on the drive. I just wouldn't worry about it personally. I know I'm going to that might raise a few eyebrows and questions, but I think you've got to think about your behaviour when you're driving the vehicle. The fact you can fill a tank up and you've got 400 miles in your tank, how long does that stay on your drive sometimes? The car, even if you're commuting into work, the most you use your vehicle in a day is about 5% of the day. It is a highly underutilized asset, and if you really think about how you use it, battery electric vehicles is a really good alternative.
And at the moment, for a lot of us, really, you'd reverse it off the drive and then drive it back on and assume you've gone to work. Because we're all at home, so I suppose range is not really a challenge.
Yeah, range is not at the moment, but hopefully it will become an issue again soon. Yeah.
One area we haven't touched, and I see as being a colossal increase, will be sort of general city light commercial vehicles in electric.
Yes.
Any thoughts on really where the volumes are going to go on that? Because that to me is total sense. It's practical. It's doable. And there isn't a range challenge.
Yeah, there is. So I mean, you can take you can perhaps include taxi cabs in that and things like that. So let's just take a step back. The driver behind that is city rules. So if you think about the EU regulations and the UK regulations I talked about earlier, they're set at a certain level, but you're finding that certain cities, in particular, and this is globally, so China, not so much in the US, but certainly in China, Europe, and UK, it is all about cities are setting lower emission targets. So if you take London, for example, there are a number of streets in London where you cannot really drive an internal combustion engine on it, without incurring a fine, almost any time of day, but particularly during the peak hours. And you need an electric vehicle to go on it. So taking your point, you look at commercial vehicles, and the drive there is to say and they're often quite a big polluter if you're looking at the old diesel engines. How do you get those guys to change more quickly? Well, you set regulation, and the city mayors and so on are doing that. The reason why I'm hesitating is it comes back to, so a good example of that is Bristol. Bristol have probably got the highest regulations at the moment. Birmingham are still trying to make a decision, and Manchester are getting close. So my point is, the reason why I'm hesitating is the supply chain. How do you make fully battery electric light commercial vehicles in the timeline? Even by 2030, they are being launched at the moment. and there's some fantastic products out there, but how they operate in the field is still really being understood, and how they work and operate and everything else. Because these, if you think about big fleets, it's like a Sky fleet or a fleet of trucks for Aldi or and so on, where they need for the last few miles or last mile a light commercial vehicle. The charging infrastructure needs to be a lot clearer. How you operate them is different, and how you manage them. So all of those things not beyond the wit of man at all. But I think it's going to be regulation that's going to really drive that. If you talk to government, because often I've had conversations with government, I say, yeah, but for heavy commercial vehicles, HGVs and so on, yeah, that'll be 2040, 2050. And they just shake their head and look at you and go, no, they want all electric, they're all commercial vehicles to be fully electric or zero emission, put it that way. And so you're seeing things like hydrogen-based larger commercial vehicles, and batteries still probably the chosen form for LCVs. Again, I think for your audience, the big thing about this is you're going to have a lot of batteries moving around the country, one way or the other, whether it's for aftermarket or for building new vehicles in the UK or in Europe. Our ability to make batteries in Europe as a whole at the moment compared to the US or China is very low, but it is going to increase and is increasing dramatically as we speak. The ability to make the components for the batteries. In fact, the UK has got very good, right from the ground, if you like, nickel and so on, even potentially lithium. We've got those products, the ability to get that stuff out of the ground, as well as make all the other individual products. So the whole supply chain has the opportunity to become integrated, and it is becoming integrated in Europe as a whole. And there's just, the demand is there. It's actually the production side of it in Europe needs to improve and increase over the next few years if we're going to get there for light commercial vehicles as well as passenger.
Okay, thank you, Justin. As usual, superb. Thanks for your help. Sorry for everybody that we did have a sound issue at the beginning. If anyone has any questions for Justin, then you can actually connect to him from where you are at the moment on EV Live and send him any personal questions, and I'm sure he'll get back to you. I'm finding more and more people want to use that facility because they don't necessarily want to ask a question in an open audience, which is considerably bigger now than it was in person. But thank you. We're obviously over time to a certain degree, but can you leave us with one little bit of a silver lining as we've entered the year as we didn't want to?
I mean, it has to be the vaccine. But the silver, but that's also important because of the fact that it is developed in this country and it is being rolled out first in this country. It's a real demonstration of how the UK is a great R&D site and has this great, and I liken it almost to battery electric vehicles and so on. We have leading R&D in this area in the UK. It's as good as anywhere in the world. But if you take pharmaceuticals and the vaccine in particular, it's important to have that in your mind because this is where we should be positioning ourselves in the global stage. And I think it's really important over the next 2-3 years that we get behind that plan and really become a force, a scientific and innovation and technological force in the world. It's not easy considering the west coast of America and China and so on. But we have some real capability here in the UK, and we really need to build on it. It's very exciting, actually.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for everybody who's joined us, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Well, thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
All the best. Good luck,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.